The quarantine posts pretend the commune can sew a city shut like a ripped sleeve. So you set the horn lamp on a damp wine crate at the mouth of the Mercato di Mezzo until a warm coin of light lands where rope, ladle, rumor, and breath must agree, or Bologna will let plague notices sail down the Apposa and write your alleys into legend without learning their grammar. The notary from the Palazzo da Curcio fingerprints a roll of statutes that smells of lampblack and caution. The podesta's sergeant pats a cudgel as if policy has a handle. Two university clerici hover with faces that have opinions about everything except buckets. Down your lane, the lantern alleys that live between bath, bakery, and body house, women sweep door thresholds with the same thin stubbornness that keeps canals flowing in September. Quarantina, the sergeant says, and you, who have known these doorways longer than the bells have known their tones, must turn that word from a headline into a street that doesn't lie. Rope makes the street tell the truth. You square the mouth of the alley because ankles obey what sermons forget, and you nail counsel at mouth height where wrists must bruise before mouths volunteer thunder. Witness heard, charter read aloud, oath copied, billet listed, fever first, wash before rumor, wash before coin, door unbarred, window latched, straw aired, pallet raised, no crowd at bench, fees displayed, thanks before charges. The plank says present. The quarter-glass boy flips his sand like a small podesta with better manners. The sisters of steam, bathwomen whose copper tubs bully heat into hygiene, drag their kettle beneath your rope and scald superstition into cooperation. If we are to be judged, this lane will be an instrument, not a rumor. Quarantine orders arrive as if paper were a bishop. The roll declares that brothels shall close on eves, lantern alleys shall hang signs, visitors shall answer in Latin or be understood by buckets. The city physician, trained among glossators who footnote the sun, insists disease walks faster than laughter. The gabellieri intend to peep the tax even when they close the doors. You do not answer with theory. Fever first is your stool beneath the shutter where cheeks confess faster than tongues. Wash before rumor steals wind from the only choir nobody meant to hire. Door unbarred receives thirst early, when a knock still feels like belonging. Window latched teaches air to mind its manners. Pallet raised tells the floor to stop pretending it is policy. Bologna imagines sin rides in from Porta San Felice and Porta Ravignana like a cavalcade. Your rope proves sickness prefers doorways. Clerici from the studio quote Aristotle at your tub. Apprentices from the Silk Guild quote their foreman. A Dominican with kind hands and sharp adjectives quotes penance. Witness heard sits each by the basin, 1 minute to rinse, 1 to speak, 1 to carry, until opinions admit they can be improved by verbs. Oath copied glues merchants' tongues to minutes. Billet listed turns strangers into neighbors long enough for sense to breed. You step through a doorway whose lantern has learned to be honest. The keeper, whose laugh used to be a trade, now sells permission by rinses and time. She taps the lid twice, greeting and oath, and men who never had to request entrance learn to enjoy the grammar of survival. No crowd at bench saves air from employment as spectacle. A student with spotless sleeves but dirty sentences tries to turn the copper into a syllabus. The sisters hand him a ladle and a schedule. He discovers rhetoric is stronger rinsed. Quarantine orders changed red light streets first by changing the price of permission. Before rope, the light and danger could borrow each other's costumes. After rope, both report to the basin. You watch doorways that once auditioned for gossip learning to time laughter to rinsing. You watch bath women promote common sense to ritual. You watch the notary's hand, formerly in love with footnotes, learn to admire lists that name who carried before they name who accused. The alley becomes predictable. The market, smelling bureaucratic safety, resettles its scales. Men buy bread with less poetry. Women buy minutes with more authority. The first night challenges the new grammar with an old temptation. A cleric in a red hood wants your rope to bow because he can pronounce quarantina as if it were a sacrament. A sergeant wants to collect fines faster than rinses. A scholar wants to observe without participating. Wash before coin removes the sergeant's appetite. Wash before rumor starves the cleric's chorus. Fever first persuades the scholar to become useful. At the end of the hour, the alley has behaved better than its critics because elbows kept time and knuckles kept silence. Your plank receives 4 taps like a small civic anthem nobody rehearsed and everyone knows. You step toward the lens because our square exists where your thumb moves. If you want rope in your own arguments, at the shop, in your comments, around the table, subscribe and tap the bell, the practical one, not the theatrical one, so part 2 lands while your wrists still remember how to talk to wood and water. In the comments, give me your 7-word quarantine rule you would actually hammer at mouth height, witness heard, wash before rumor, door unbarred first, and tell me what your street calls sermons sold as medicine. The sisters will pin the best to the Oposa Bridge before terse. Morning brings the first test. A cart from Porta Procola with barrels of Apennine wine, and 2 sailors whose coughs deny their songs. The Gabalieri want the duty and none of the minutes. Rope picks the minutes. Billet listed makes the sailors into sentences with dates. Oath copied binds their captain to the quarter-glass, as if time were a flag. Fever first respects their throats more than their bravado. A notary arrives to certify your insolence. Charter read aloud returns him to the page where the Senate ranked rinses above rhetoric during the last pest. He signs what he can't afford to admire and later will claim to have invented. You will let him. Lantern alleys export their accent into the piazza. A keeper named Bianca nails common sense in charcoal beside the door. 2 taps, basin low, window latched, door unbarred for thirst, no crowd at bench, laughter scheduled, not improvised. Men who hate rules discover they love invitations. Women who hate spectacle discover they love safety they didn't have to purchase with silence. A student coins a proverb, better the basin than the bribe, and spends all day living up to his wit. The bathhouse near Vicolo dei Poeti publishes a clarification for the quarantina. 2 taps, then soup. Bread before stories downgrades 3 lectures into kindness. Fees displayed taxes, every stanza about purity, into lids for widows whose cisterns have learned to count. Thanks before charges posts names in the order that keeps the city teachable. Stokers, carriers, keepers, clerks, 2 apprentices from the silk shop who thought virtue was a hat and learned it was a bucket. A Dominican with a clever face proposes a procession to purge the district and console the faithful. You price his preferences on your plank where knuckles must touch the truth. 2 jugs per hymn, 4 lids per verse that advertises shame, 6 scoured cups for every accusation sung at a woman, 8 loaves to the hospital for every witness who tries poetry before rinsing. The procession collapses into deliveries. Consolation arrives lighter than intended and more believable. By noon, the university has decided to feel generous. A poet climbs a fruit box to declaim that plague is a metaphor for souls that refuse grammar. Rope interrupts him with grammar that refuses metaphors. Wash before rumor steals his audience into usefulness. He invents a couplet that praises buckets and knocks twice. He discovers applause is inferior to being thanked by name under thanks at sunset. You carry the rope to a house newly marked suspect contact in chalk so fresh it thinks it is destiny. The midwife at the door meets your eye as if you were medicine she can afford. Door unbarred is the receipt you offer fear. Window latched keeps weather out of the paperwork. No crowd at bed protects lungs from pity. 3 women who would have been spectators become carriers within 1 minute of touching the basin. The city changes shape faster than most statutes. Pallet raised, straw aired. A child arrives. Thanks before charges records the correct order of heroes. The chalk becomes laundry. The lane remains a liturgy of verbs. At the end of part 1, the point is simple and difficult. Quarantine orders changed Bologna's red light streets because rope made permission public, basins made laughter honest, and minutes became the only currency that survived both tax and rumor. Lantern keepers stopped selling thrills and started selling safety. Bathwomen promoted scald to scripture. Notaries learned to copy gratitude before fines. Clerics learned brevity. Students learned to knock. Sailors learned rinses. The city learned it liked its neighbors alive. Tomorrow, The podestal will attempt to claim the basin as a commune invention. The basin will smile and let him, provided he rinses first. If you want me to drag this grammar to the Palazzo de Curcio when the bannered men try to turn policy into theater, through the bagnos, when steam advertises sainthood, across the Apposa, when rumor travels faster than bridges, and into the university taverns, when glossators attempt to footnote breath, say, continue, and subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss part 2. In the comments, leave your 7 words for our plank: witness heard, wash before rumor, door unbarred first, so we can nail the bravest ones at the alley mouth where knuckles must meet them before mouths remember how cheap it is to be correct. The Palazzo da Curcio pretends banners can disinfect policy, so you rope the arcaded stair from spindle to column and set the horn lamp on a notary's capsa until a warm coin of light lands where basin, seal, rumor, and breath must agree, or Bologna will let statutes sing while buckets do the work alone. The podesta's sergeant polishes cudgel and conscience. A gabelier counts fines like figs. 2 glossatori lean on Latin as if it were scaffolding. You answer with elbows. Rope squares the stair. The quarter-glass boy flips his sand. The sisters of steam shoulder copper to the landing and scald adjectives down to verbs. You nail counsel at mouth height, where wrists must bruise before mouths rent thunder. Witness heard, charter read aloud, oath copied, billet listed, fever first, wash before rumor, wash before coin, door unbarred, window latched, straw aired, pallet raised, no crowd at bench, fees displayed, thanks before charges. The plank says present. Law learns its meter from kettles. A rubric arrives with a ceremonial cough. Lantern alleys shall suspend commerce. Women there shall confess. Visitors shall be noted and named. The notary reads like a man standing close to a window he doesn't want to open. You read the room. Charter read aloud lands the page where the commune promised rinses rank above rhetoric during last fever. You set a basin between Latin and willpower. Wash before rumor reduces 3 speeches to something usable. Oath copied ties the sergeant's charm to minutes. He looks improved by math. The alley sends a delegation disguised as deliveries. Bianca, with her common sense board, asks whether 2 taps, greeting and oath, count as legal speech. The notary suffers conversion by practicality. They count. A bagnaro tattooed with steam wants to know if soup after scald can be ritual. Bread before stories insists. The gabelier wonders whether rinses can be taxed. Fees displayed informs him. Shame is taxed first into buckets, then into lids, and if there's money left, he may ask the sisters nicely. He washes instead and surprises no one more than himself. The first argument of the morning walks on silk. A glossator claims quarantina requires closure without exception. You open a door. Door unbarred for thirst with rules. Window latched for privacy without theater. No crowd at bench for lungs without audience. He frowns into usefulness and agrees to inspect rinses instead of love. Your board collects 4 knuckles as if present were contagious. You permit yourself a grin as short-lived as good news has to be to remain pure. A cart from Porta San Momolo delivers its exam, barrels, cuffs, songs. Billet listed turns strangers into sentences. Fever first gives their cheeks a republic to join. The gabellieri want duty before minutes. Wash before coin goes first, coin survives. A notary lifts eyebrows like weights he intends to put down. He signs in the margin of his own order. Spill paid before fines assessed. He looks like a man who accidentally parented a better idea than he had planned. Your rope travels with you into a courtyard, newly chalked, suspect contact. A baker's laundry wants to be law. You refuse conscription. Door unbarred invites help. Window latched sends indignation outdoors to sulk. Straw aired, pallet raised, knife scalded, persuade gravity and fear to stop arguing. The child arrives. The beadle, early, offers to write. Witness heard puts the pen in the baker's flowery hand. He prints names that should not be forgotten, and 3 deeds that should be. Thanks before charges, orders the list the way lungs prefer it. Chalk quits, laundry remains. Because alleys are contagious in both directions, you step toward the lens for contagion that keeps people alive. If you want rope in your thread, at your team stand-up, in your shop meeting, across your comment feed, subscribe and tap the bell, the practical one, not the theatrical one. So part 3 lands while your wrists remember the grammar. In the comments, give your 7-word quarantine rule. Witness heard, wash before rumor, door unbarred first, and tell us what your street calls sermons sold as medicine. The sisters will pin the best by the Aposa Bridge. Midday tries theater again. A Dominican proposes a white procession to console the afflicted and instruct the careless. You price it. Fees displayed equals jugs, lids, loaves, pallets. He tastes the math and agrees that consolation breathes better when it carries. The procession dissolves into deliveries that require no witnesses to succeed. Pilgrims applaud with their hands. The studio wants its turn. 2 scholars argue whether contagio travels by vapors or commerce. You supply minutes, which travel by basin. Wash before rumor abolishes 3 syllogisms. Oath copied ties learned men to the quarter-glass. One discovers rinsing is more erotic than triumph. The other laughs and says he will footnote the basin. You make him carry first. He footnotes afterward and becomes the only gloss you reread in spring. Lantern alleys export their accent to two markets accustomed to lying by weight. At the fish stalls, wash before coin teaches scales humility. At the herb table, wash before rumor teaches wrists scandal's natural antagonist. Merchants, who respect evidence even when they mock it, imitate buckets because buckets are cheaper than fines. Bianca's common sense board acquires smudges the way saints acquire candles. She leaves it dirty so girls can see authority may be clean and hands need not. A painter arrives with an etching he hopes will memorialize your rope as exotic morality, a lantern keeper haloed by grammar. You buy the plate into kindness with fees displayed, and commission something less flattering and more useful, a basin nailed low enough for knuckles, a rope nailed where ankles can learn to be citizens, a plank where wrists volunteer before mouths remember theater. He sulks into employment and prints 1,000 copies that become household rules faster than frescoes ever converted anyone. He used to want to be immortal. Now he wants to be thanked under thanks. Progress. By Vespers, the palazzo discovers that gratitude is a muscle. The clerk proposes that every fine entered must be preceded by a line, witness heard, naming who carried and who rinsed. The podesta signs because it costs less than eloquence. The sergeant signs because it saves his feet. The notary signs because he likes being the sort of man who surprises himself. The sisters clap once, which is how you know a city just got better at its job in a way historians will have trouble turning into a paragraph. In the alley, the last call arrives wearing arrogance and needing permission, a student noble with a lover he will not admit and a cough he cannot hide. Rope teaches him the alphabet. Wash before rumor retires his favorite weapon. Door unbarred saves her from begging. No crowd at bench prevents the whole street from purchasing somebody else's shame. He knocks the plank, awkward, honest. She breathes through the contraction and refuses to be a story. Knife scalded, linen aired, swaddles rinsed, palate raised, life. You write his name under thanks lower than hers, so he can learn to recognize the order of salvation. You close this hour by keeping no one comfortable, yourself least of all, and letting nothing remain brave in theory alone. Rope stays knotted where ankles will remember. The basin cools with the self-respect of water that kept sentences short. The quarter glass turns and does not apologize. In Part 3, we will follow the grammar into the bagnios when steam auditions for sainthood, across the university taverns when glossaders attempt to footnote breath, along the Apposa when rumor tries to travel faster than bridges, and back through the palazzo when policy remembers it likes applause. Say continue and tap the bell. Bring your 7 words for the plank and keep knocking twice, greeting and oath, on the lids that remind your street that minutes are worth more than myths. The bagnio thinks steam can absolve, so you rope the arch from brazier to bench and set the horn lamp on a barrel of ash until a warm coin of light lands where basin, bellows, rumor, and breath must agree, or Bologna will let theology take the towel while contagion rents the room by the minute. Bath boys rush buckets like trumpeters. A matron trades proverbs with heat. A Dominican with city-worn sandals raises a hand as if steam were a homily. You answer with grammar. Rope squares the doorway. The quarter-glass boy flips his sand. The sisters of steam tip copper into cents. Witness heard. Charter read aloud. Oath copied. Billet listed. Fever first. Wash before rumor. Wash before coin. Door unbarred. Window latched. Straw aired. Pallet raised. No crowd at bench. Fees displayed. Thanks before charges. The plank says present, and every bench grows honest enough to hold lungs rather than headlines. The proprietor, who loves reputation the way poets love rhyme, attempts a new tariff labeled virtue. You post a cheaper one labeled minutes. Bread before stories, prices chatter into soup. Wash before rumor, taxes gossip into errands. No crowd at bench stops desire from hiring theater. A nobleman with a cough shaped like an argument proposes private exemption. Door unbarred receives thirst. Window latched dismisses spectacle. He knocks the plank once in confusion, again in relief, then carries a pail because privacy is cheaper after participation than before. The sisters note his conversion with exactly one nod, which is their way of applauding without encouraging relapse. Students stream down from the studio with quotes that have never fetched water. Two glossatory argue whether contagio walks or rides commerce. You lend them buckets and a timetable. Oath copied binds their tongues to the quarter glass. Wash before rumor turns disputation into service. The clever one discovers an affection for the basin and drafts a marginal gloss that reads, "Time is the only commentary that cures." The other discovers applause is inferior to thanks and asks sheepishly if his name can be spelled right on the board. You spell it right, he carries correctly, he learns what adulthood feels like on paper. Because this alley now shares air with your screen, pause with me and do the practical thing that turns attention into rope. Subscribe and tap the bell. The practical one, not the theatrical one. So part 4 lands while your wrists still remember the grammar. In the comments, write your 7-word quarantine rule you would actually hammer at mouth height. Witness heard, wash before rumor, door unbarred first, and tell me what your street calls sermons sold as medicine. The sisters will nail the best beside the apposa. The apposa sulks under grates and cobbles, trying to keep secrets that ought to be schedules. You lift 3 lids and discover how fast rumor can travel when water wants company. Rope turns culvert mouths into lanes. Fever first catches a bargeman whose bravery confuses volume with virtue. Wash before coin persuades the gabalieri that duty is safer after soap. Witness heard seats a washerwoman whose ledger of stains outruns the notary's book of fines. She speaks in verbs: boil, beat, rinse, wring, prove. The notary listens in nouns, then learns to copy her verbs. He calls it legal reform. You call it housekeeping. The river calls it relief. Midday pushes you into the tavern by the jurist's college, where rhetoric practices acrobatics and remembers to pay only afterward. A singer balances shame on a rhyme. A sergeant peddles exceptions. A young lawyer attempts to reconcile conscience with applause. Fees displayed assigns their art to lids and loaves. Wash before rumor preserves the parts of wit that don't endanger tomorrow. The lawyer, chastened and brighter, drafts a petition that puts witness heard before every accusation, then tests it on himself by carrying 2 pails up the tavern stairs. The singer revises his chorus to include the 2 taps. The sergeant discovers discretion is lighter than a cudgel when buckets are full. Lantern alleys export their accent again, this time east toward the silk looms. Bianca's common sense board grows smudged by knuckles. The loom mistress paints the 2 taps on a beam where apprentices reach without asking. Window latched keeps thread honest around air. Door unbarred receives thirst without requiring confession. No crowded bench lets the room be a room rather than a rumor factory. A foreman known for speeches discovers he enjoys timing better. He may return to speeches. The poll will retain the taps. Everyone wins. A deputation from the palazzo arrives with an amendment disguised as gratitude. For the honor of the commune, the notary reads, Studia and Bagnos may hang the basin as a civic sign. You accept and decline simultaneously. The basin belongs low enough for knuckles, not high enough for banners. Charter read aloud pins that sentence in public. The notary writes custom beside it so he can pretend laws chase habits. A week from now, he will claim originality. You will clap once, because clapping once is how the sisters forgive plagiarists who carry. You follow rope into a house chalked suspect contact with affection, flamboyant as an opera. A baker's daughter labors while a balcony pretends to be a balcony. Rope turns it into a hallway. No crowd at bench strips the scene of decoration. Knife scalded, linen aired, swaddles rinsed, palette raised, the quiet commandment gives the hour work. The child arrives. The balcony, deprived of lines, applauds with water. Thanks before charges teaches the ledger to say, you were brave, before it says you were loud. The balcony learns something it can't pronounce, but will practice anyway. Because quarantine orders do not end in alleys, you escort grammar back up the stair at the palazzo. The podesta wants headlines that rhyme with victory. The gabellariae want receipts that rhyme with fines. The sergeant wants permission to enjoy compassion. Charter read aloud, marries duty to minutes. Fees displayed, keeps punishment from shoplifting dignity. Thanks before charges, instructs the clerk to learn humility as a penstroke. He does. His hand looks younger on the page. The Dominican returns with an experiment, confession after rinsing. He knocks the plank twice as if asking your permission, then hears two women who have already washed say more truth than clean consciences usually afford. It is easier after the basin, he admits. You do not say, "We told you." You say, "2 more pails to the Aposa," and watch Christianity prove surprisingly portable when carried by elbows that already planned to work. Evening sets a snare for your patience. A bachelor noble with friends in the studio and enemies in the alley decides to audition for tragedy on your rope. He refuses the basin, then fears the plank, then tries to purchase minutes with Latin. Wash before rumor removes his mask. Door unbarred preserves the part of him that came to ask for entrance rather than reputation. No crowd at bench refuses the chorus he brought and assembles a working party instead. Beneath the theatrics, he is frightened and not cruel. That makes him redeemable. He knocks, he rinses, he carries. He leaves less interesting and more human. Excellent. You close the baño with the forgetting drill you've taught everywhere, because it is the only liturgy that always survives without priests. Crates down, rope unknotted, bench set back, board left up. The proprietor counts minutes instead of coins and discovers he is richer than he feared. The Dominican returns to the piazza with his sleeves rolled. The notary returns to his desk with his ink simpatico. The Sisters of Steam heave copper toward the next doorway that intends to argue until it learns chores. Bologna breathes like a city that prefers neighbors to anecdotes. If you want this grammar to keep moving into your hallways, your threads, your kitchens, say continue and tap the bell so you don't miss part 4. Drop your 7 words for the plank, witness heard, wash before rumor, door unbarred first, and tell us where we should hammer rope next. Palazzo Chamber, Apasa Bank by moonlight, the studio's drinking rooms when glossaders attempt to footnote breath. We have rope, lids, bowls, maps, chalk, a quarter glass that never lies, a plank that refuses flattery, and a city increasingly willing to be better at its job as soon as someone reminds it how. The studio's drinking rooms pretend glosses, can footnote breath. So you rope the corridor between the tavern door and the trestles and set the horn lamp on an upturned keg until a warm coin of light lands where cup, claws, rumor, and lungs must agree, or Bologna will let disputations adjudicate minutes while buckets do the work alone. Young doctors with inked fingers lean on Aristotle as if he were a handrail. A canon from San Domenico polishes objections the way a sergeant polishes a cudgel. 2 silk foremen, sleeves dusted by thread and pride, arrive convinced Quarantina means their workers owe them obedience and their customers owe them faith. You answer them all with grammar. Rope squares the entrance. The quarter-glass boy flips his sand. The sisters of steam carry their copper to the back, where smoke becomes humility. Witness heard, charter read aloud, oath copied, billet listed, fever first, wash before rumor, wash before coin, door unbarred, window latched, straw aired, pallet raised, no crowd at bench, fees displayed, thanks before charges. The plank says present, and even Aristotle, if he were here, would have to rinse. The host wants margin and spectacle. You sell him minutes. Bread before stories purchases a silence eloquent enough to teach. Wash before rumor rents every argument a bowl. No crowd at bench persuades a chorus. It will be more persuasive tomorrow if it carries now. A glossator juggles premises until the sisters hand him a ladle. He discovers a truth he will never put in Latin. Rinsed people argue better because they stay. The canon watches him become bearable and begins to hope for his order. The silk men notice that customers breathe longer when they knock twice, greeting and oath, and imagine a new etiquette that is also good business. Because this lane now shares air with your screen, do the practical thing that turns attention into rope. Subscribe and tap the bell, the practical one, not the theatrical one, so Part 5 lands while your wrists still remember the grammar. Then drop your 7-word quarantine rule for the plank. Witness heard, wash before rumor, door unbarred first, and tell me what your street calls sermons sold as medicine. The sisters will nail the best beside the apposa. The apposa, petty and proud, attempts to carry rumor under 3 bridges. You lift 2 grates and borrow a broom from a fishwife who thinks tact is theft from truth. Rope turns culvert mouths into small republics. Fever first finds a barge boy whose chest mistook bravery for melody. Wash before coin persuades the gabellieri that duty is stronger scoured. Witness heard sits the washerwoman with the bruised knuckles and better bookkeeping than the notary. She names stains like evidence. He copies verbs like a man discovering mercy has a ledger. The river calms, then remembers to mind its own banks. Night tries to hire the university again. A poet climbs a chair to declare that plague is a metaphor for citizens who forget their souls. Rope removes his stool as politely as necessary. Fees displayed taxes his stanza into lids. Wash before rumor convinces his audience to applaud with pails. He revises mid-rhyme, knocking twice between lines, and realizes why gratitude endures longer than clapping. The silk foremen watch students carry and envy them their reputations. Bianca loans them a common sense board and suggests they earn one. A house chalked suspect contact turns a corner into a courtroom. The widow who sweeps for the studio has been named by a neighbor who prefers adjectives to errands. The notary, armed with a role and an instinct for performance, asks whether her midwife used a culter honestus. You hand him the knife hot. Knife scalded answers more elegantly than speech. Door unbarred allows testimony that includes water. Window latched persuades a draft to stop volunteering opinions. The quarter glass lets everyone breathe at the same time. The infant arrives. The chalk becomes laundry. The neighbor carries 2 pails and learns the price of narration. Lantern alleys export their accent uphill. The palazzo wants a statement. You give it furniture. Charter read aloud pins rinses above rhetoric again. Fees displayed turns policy into deliveries. Thanks before charges teaches clerks to write gratitude before fines without damaging their dignity. A sergeant accustomed to winning by volume discovers the pleasure of being first to wash. His men follow because imitation is easier than courage and often amounts to the same thing in public. A Dominican presents an experiment, confessions scheduled after basins. He knocks the plank as if asking permission from common sense itself. 2 women rinse, then speak, then carry. It is lighter this way, he admits, discovering a pastoral theology the studium will not believe until it sees it 4 more times. He blesses copper without irony and leaves without sermon. The alley calls that progress and goes back to breathing. A glosser, keener than his friends, drafts a petition to staple witness heard to every charge the palazzo receives during quarantina. You ask him to test it on himself. He does. 2 pails up the tavern stairs, 1 apology to a washerwoman, 1 signed minute on your plank, and is forgiven faster than eloquence could have arranged. The commentary is life, he says, and for once every student in the room listens because the remark rents water credibly. The apposa, again, because water, like rhetoric, likes to relapse. A rumor tries to sprint from culvert to culvert, claiming the basin is idolatry. Rope interrupts where stone prefers to look busy. Wash before rumor downgrades zeal. Oath copied binds 2 culvert boys to the quarter glass. Thanks before charges gives the fishwife a line she deserved months ago. She smiles as if the city had finally learned to pay its debts. A procession of penance attempts to buy the alley's evening. The Dominican returns with a compromise you can accept. Him between errands, candles after lids. Fees displayed sustains the melody without endangering tomorrow. Bianca times verses with the quarter glass and discovers hymns are prettier polite. By the second stanza, even the poet carries. By the third, the hymn forgets itself and becomes soup. A door where you are unwelcome becomes the hour's test. The landlord wants quarantine to be theater. The tenant needs it to be schedule. Rope persuades. No crowd at bench saves air. Door unbarred lets humility arrive without humiliation. Knife scalded, linen aired, Swaddles rinsed convince prophecy to leave quietly. The landlord signs spill paid without understanding why decency feels like profit. The tenant sleeps. The city writes a memory that will not shame it next winter. Because each hour is a hinge, you step toward the lens again to keep it from becoming a balcony. If you want this grammar hammered into the places you argue and decide, projects, councils, threads, say continue and tap the bell so part 5 reaches you before rhetoric remembers it outruns basins. Drop your 7 words for the plank so we can nail the best at mouth height where knuckles must meet them before mouths remember the cheapness of being correct. The studio sends a deputation to praise your order and privately undermine it with exceptions. You accept the praise and price the exceptions. Fees displayed costs them into lids and loaves. The ledger looks noble. The alley looks safer. A young notary whispers that he has begun writing witness heard before every sentence. You tell him he has chosen to be legible to his grandchildren. He beams like a man who survived his education. The silk foremen bring you their women, arguing about the basin's place in the Labor Day. Low enough for knuckles, you say. They nail it there. They paint the 2 taps above. They discover apprentices negotiate better when the grammar is visible. The shop loses fewer hours to rumor and gains more to rhythm. You say nothing and let them feel original. The sisters always permit others to be right last. Just before Vespers, the apassa gives you one more ambush, a child, a culvert, an audience of opinions. Rope locates verbs. Fever first gives cheeks a republic. Wash before rumor prevents poetry. Thanks before charges names the culvert boys who pulled together instead of preaching. You let them print their names large. Some lessons deserve to be bragged. You close the tavern with the same liturgy that wins every hour worth keeping. Crates down, rope unknotted, bench set back, board left up. The host counts minutes and finds them profitable. The canon wipes benches with a competence he will refuse to preach about. The glossiter drafts an appendix titled On the Utility of Buckets, and for once does not add himself to the authors. The sisters of steam push copper toward the next doorway that thinks it belongs to headlines until chores teach it otherwise. Bologna breathes like a city that prefers neighbors to anecdotes and buckets to footnotes. Part 5 takes this grammar to the palazzo when applause rehearses, to the river when rumor sprints, to the silk halls when courtesy pays, and back through the lantern alleys where permission became a language. Say continue and tap the bell, then write your 7 words so we can hammer them where knuckles will meet them before mouths pretend they invented sense. The palazzo decides applause can be a policy, so you carry the rope from the studio tavern to the red brick loggia and set the horn lamp on a balustrade where proclamations like to pose, until a warm coin of light lands where basin, bell, rumor, and trade must agree, or Bologna will let quarantine become a costume, while lantern alleys go back to improvising. Heralds fuss the silk banners into grammar you don't trust. A gabellarier smiles the way a purse strings itself. Three glossatory lean on Latin as if breath were a footnote. You answer in elbows, not adjectives. Rope squares the stairs. The quarter-glass boy flips his sand. The sisters of steam hoist copper to the landing, and the air learns which verbs outrank ceremony. You nail counsel at mouth height, where wrists must bruise before mouths remember their job. Witness heard, charter read aloud, oath copied, billet listed, fever first, wash before rumor, wash before coin, door unbarred, window latched, straw aired, pallet raised, no crowd at bench, fees displayed, thanks before charges. The plank says present. The banners, deprived of thunder, agree to be weather. A herald unrolls a ribboned order that hopes to replace buckets with a balcony. For the peace of the commune, he reads, lantern alleys shall suspend laughter at sunset. Bagnos will ring a bell before rinses. Market inspectors may license exceptions. Charter read aloud returns the page where the Senate ranked rinses above rhetoric last time Fever auditioned. Witness heard seats Bianca with her common sense board, the silk foreman who paints the two taps on a beam, the Dominican who learned confession after basins, the fishwife who discovered pails can veto poems. The herald tries a flourish. Wash before rumor steals his volume. Oath copied gives him minutes, and you watch merit become habit as politely as a street can. The river decides to test your attention, the way water always does when men get busy with speeches. Under three bridges, the Oposa humors a rumor. Lantern alleys will be exempt tonight for morale, and rinses will be forgiven for unity. Rope converts rumor into chores. At the culvert mouth, Fever first catches a barge boy who thinks bravery is louder than lungs. At the toll chain wash, before coin persuades the gabellieri that duty survives better scoured. At the steps to the dye yard, witness herd seats a washerwoman whose knuckles footnote the notary with improved verbs. The rumor skids on the slick of its own adjectives and goes home thirsty. You write two names under thinks that the herald will pretend to read later with solemn humility. Let him. Lantern alleys export their new language to people who never expected to learn from doorways. Bianca's board acquires smudges that prove authority has been touched. A keeper paints the two taps, greeting and oath, inside her lintel, where shy men can memorize the rite without admitting they needed it. Apprentices from the silk quarter arrive asking if courtesy pays. They discover it does. Door unbarred receives thirst without receipt. Window latched saves air from performing. No crowd at bench keeps gossip from hiring lungs. A foreman drafts a shop rule that begins with time and ends with wage. He credits a glossiter. Bianca grins and lets him keep the myth because buckets like allies, rich in vanity and poor in resistance. Because this corridor now shares air with your feed, do the simple thing that turns watching into rope. Subscribe and tap the bell, the practical one, not the theatrical one, so Part 6 lands while your wrists still remember this grammar. In the comments, post your 7-word quarantine rule you would actually hammer at mouth height. Witness heard, wash before rumor, door unbarred first, and tell me what your street calls sermons sold as medicine. The sisters will nail the best beside the oposa. A fire starts where speeches love to end. A balcony hung with red cloth. A candle that wanted to be a policy. A crowd eager for proof. Smoke tries to hire the quarantina as theater. Rope demotes it. No crowd at bench becomes a fire break. Straw aired keeps panic from learning to breathe smoke. Window latched prevents wind from making governance out of ash. The Dominican arrives with the experiment you liked, confession after basins, and adds a new clause under heat, advice after buckets. He has never looked more useful. The glossiter, who earlier footnoted the basin, writes the hour into Latin. And for once, Latin minds its station and carries. The palazzo wants its triumph anyway. The notary proposes a scroll to thank the faithful and admonish the careless. You require an appendix titled Witness Heard, names of carriers before names of accusers. He hesitates. You hand him the ladle. He rinses. He signs with a hand that does not need applause to feel alive. The podesta's sergeant knocks the plank in a rhythm that all his men begin imitating. Imitation is the city's only sacrament that never fails. The university drinks rooms attempt relapse by debate. Is quarantina justice or theater? Asks a student who can't carry a bucket sober. Fees displayed prices, the question in lids and loaves. He pays, knocks twice, and finds rhetoric easier after rinses. A canon watches the studiosi obey rope and discovers envy is lighter when diluted. He stops rehearsing condemnation and, to the surprise of his sleeves, begins to hand cups. The sisters clap once because they do not punish conversions when they look like work. A suspect contact. Door forces the afternoon to behave. Chalk thinks it is destiny. You introduce it to laundry. Door unbarred allows the neighbor who used to preach to arrive, carrying. Window latched keeps weather from auditioning. Knife scalded. Linen aired. Swaddles rinsed. Palate raised, persuade prophecy to retire. The baby's first cry interrupts a sentence a glossiter was about to admire. He writes it down anyway. Mere rebilia buccatorum. The mother laughs. She will not remember Latin. She will remember soup. You put 4 names under thanks and leave the chalk to soak. The silk foreman asks whether courtesy pays at scale. You take them to Bianca's door. The board inside the lintel hears 200 knuckles in a week. each tap a coin in a currency that inflates kindness and deflates scandal. The foreman returned to the quarter with beams painted in the two-tap pattern and a schedule pinned low enough for apprentices to teach overseers by accident. The quarter grows quieter without losing jokes. The studio misreads this as decadence. The alley recognizes it as adulthood. A small riot of paper threatens the piazza. 3 broad sheets with different remedies for survival, 1 pamphlet selling penance by subscription, a woodcut of a lantern keeper sanctified into the problem she solved. Fees displayed buys the plates into ladles. The printer grumbles, then sings while carrying. The woodcutter re-engraves a basin nailed low and a rope that refuses to clap. By dusk, 100 doorways own the image. People point less and knock more. Because the rope is hung on habits as much as on nails. Step with me into the practical monotony that keeps cities honest. Crates down, rope unknotted, bench set back, board left up. The host counts minutes and discovers they are profitable. The canon wipes tables in a piece he refuses to sermonize. The glossiter drafts on the primacy of rinses and commits the rare virtue of leaving his name last. The sisters push copper toward the next argument that believes itself an idea. Bologna breathes like a place more interested in neighbors than anecdotes. The river tries the old trick at moonrise. Exemptions, it whispers through culverts, for morale. Rope says morale is a basin with a schedule. Fever first catches a pilgrim who thought bravery outran lungs. Wash before coin fends off a tax farmer attempting to praise his way past the bowl. Witness heard seats 2 culvert boys whose rescue of a child today qualifies them for fame. Then hands them a brush, because cleaning grates is an encore worth attending. They grin like saints who prefer verbs. A last ambush climbs the loggia steps with a trumpeter and a friend in scarlet who has not washed since childhood. They would sell minutes for melody and policy for applause. Rope occupies the measure between notes. Wash before rumor persuades the chorus into buckets. Fees displayed taxes bravura into bricks for an old woman's stove. The scarlet friend discovers anonymity accompanied by usefulness, tastes better than performances that leave hunger in the alleys. He knocks the plank twice and leaves like a sober person. You end the hour not with applause, but with the only ritual that survives in short winters and long. Thanks before charge is read, where anyone can steal the tone. Bianca. The loom mistress. 2 culvert boys. The Dominican who carried more than he preached. The fishwife who corrected the notary without humiliating him. The notary who let her. The students who washed before arguing and therefore learned faster. The quarter-glass boy whose minutes never lied. The sisters of steam whose elbows translated law. The rope which refused to clap and thereby saved more lives than anyone's last good idea. Say, continue, and we'll carry this grammar back into the palazzo when policy remembers it loves applause, along the Apposa when rumor thinks bridges, across the silk quarter where courtesy compounds, and through lantern alleys where permission has become a language. Tap the bell, the practical one, not the theatrical one, so you don't miss part 6, and add your 7 words for the plank. We'll hammer the bravest at mouth height where knuckles will meet them before mouths remember the cheapness of being correct. The Apposa thinks moonlight is an exemption, so you rope the arches from grate to grate and set the horn lamp on a wet bollard until a warm coin of light lands where water, wrist, rumor, and trade must agree, or Bologna will let the culverts smuggle exceptions under the bridges you just taught to behave. A gabalier leans on his scale the way weak stories lean on volume. 2 students in fine hats bring a sonnet to bribe the hour. The Palazzo Herald arrives with a scroll and an appetite for applause. You answer none of them with adjectives. Rope squares the stone. The quarter-glass boy flips his sand. The sisters of steam tilt copper toward the current, and steam translates moonlight into choices you can carry. Witness heard. Charter read aloud. Oath copied. Billet listed. Fever first. Wash before rumor. Wash before coin. Door unbarred. Window latched. Straw aired. Pallet raised. No crowd at bench. Fees displayed. Thanks before charges. The plank says present, where knuckles must brush truth before mouths volunteer thunder. The gabalier complains rinses cost him rhythm. Wash before coin persuades his ledger into longer survival. The sonneteers attempt a flourish. Fees displayed taxes their couplet into lids and their coda into loaves. They discover a rhyme can live inside usefulness. The herald touches the basin because he is not a fool, signs because repetition has made it easy, and keeps his scroll rolled, which is precisely how proclamations should behave at rivers. A barge boy coughs like an argument rehearsing. Fever first gives him the stool and rescues the poem from discovering it is a funeral. 2 culvert lads who used to outrun enforcement arrive with brushes and an hour you taught them to own. They joke as if being decent were fashion. You let them. The fashionable thing is cheaper to maintain than the beautiful thing, and beauty will forgive you if it breathes. Lantern alleys export their accent across the water onto the silk quay. Bianca's board has become famous enough to be mocked. That is how you know it is working. A foreman points to the 2 taps, greeting and oath, and asks if courtesy still pays now that spring is considering itself permanent. Door unbarred receives thirst without receipt. Window latched retires theater. No crowd at bench keeps lungs from renting themselves to choruses. The apprentices knock and rinse and gossip later. The foreman pretends to have invented all of this. You smile the indulgent smile elbowed women reserve for men who finally agree to be sensible. Because this water stare is also the comment thread you're staring at, pause with me and put a hand on the habit. Subscribe and tap the bell, the practical one, not the theatrical one, so Part 7 lands while your wrists still remember the grammar. In the comments, leave your 7-word quarantine rule you would actually hammer at mouth height. Witness heard, wash before rumor, door unbarred first, and tell me what your street calls sermons sold as medicine. The sisters will nail the best beside the apposa. The palazzo holds a rehearsal for triumph that your rope refuses to stage. A balcony unfurls red and gold. A choir warms vowels. A Dominican with a decent memory requests one last cleansing. Charter read aloud returns everyone to the sentence where rinses outrank rhetoric and gratitude precedes fines. The Dominican accepts the hierarchy because he remembers how the winter sounded when he forgot it. Fees displayed prices his hymn in jugs, lids, and loaves. The choir starts and stops in time with carrying. Half the city will later remember this as a procession. The other half will tell the truth and call it deliveries. A house chalked suspect contact thinks destiny can be scrawled. You bring laundry. The landlord jangles a ring of keys like arguments. The tenant answers with breath. Door unbarred allows help. Window latched evicts spectators. Pallet raised pardons the floor. Knife scalded, linen aired, swaddles rinsed, coordinate a mercy more interesting than outrage. The child arrives. The landlord, out of habit, reaches for a speech. Witness heard hands him a bucket. He carries and learns to praise afterward. Students invent an objection to practice because philosophy fears boredom. Every rule admits exceptions, one declares radiantly. Excellent, you reply. Price them. Fees displayed converts his brilliance into lids and a palette. He knocks twice between lines and becomes legible to his neighbors for the first time since he bought that hat. His friend, more frightened, therefore more helpful, copies Bianca's board and posts it at the studio gate. The first knuckles to test it belong to a professor who taught evidence for 20 years without washing between clauses. He rinses. He looks 10 years younger. The apposa wants to sprint toward Porta San Vitale with rumors in its teeth. Rope trips it where the culvert mouths widen. Wash before rumor removes a performance from a fisherman who almost convinced himself he was a prophet. 2 apprentices drag a grate clear and earn their names under thanks twice, once for courage, once for finishing. The herald watches boys become worth more than broadsheets and decides to put their names on the scroll he keeps rolled. You nod. Fame is best served in small slices. Lantern alleys. Bored of being virtuous, try to relapse into reputation. You keep them honest with timing. No crowd at bench protects privacy from nostalgia. Door unbarred keeps courage fluid. Window latched prevents performance from buying lungs. A proprietor proposes charging extra for pure hours. Bianca reads the board aloud, taps the plank once, and the market chooses her price over his slogan, because her price includes survival and his includes applause. The slogan retires to a drawer. The proprietor does not. He learns to measure outcomes instead of adjectives. Because palaces love to steal credit, the notary arrives to rename common sense. He proposes custom of the basin as a legal phrase. You propose keeping it nailed low enough for knuckles. Oath copied ties his vocabulary to your stare. He signs and smiles, not because he wins, but because the word truly looks better after being rinsed. The quarter-glass boy writes the minute beside the signature for future historians who will be tempted to lie ambitiously. Give them dates, they behave. A trumpet tries to sell absolution to the piazza. You buy his air with chores, fees displayed, taxes, bravura into bricks for a widow's stove. Wash before rumor moves his crowd into usefulness. Witness, herd seats two women whose buckets taught the trumpet how to end a song politely. He nods, breathless, and for once understands why gratitude keeps an audience longer than admiration. A door you expected never to open becomes this hour's hinge. The silk quarter's richest house invites your basin. The steward has constructed a maze of etiquette to protect his employer from minutes. You move the furniture. Door unbarred, window latched, no crowd at bench. A grandmother grieves in 3 languages. A girl breathes in 1. The steward carries at last, weeping publicly in effort rather than in speech. Thanks before charges teaches the ledger to distinguish the kind of pride worth funding. Because you must make this pattern exportable, you carry grammar into the brickworks at the city edge. Workers who missed half the winter learn the 2 taps inside the gate, paint the board low for calloused hands, and discover quarantina made them cheaper to lead and harder to fool. The foreman stares at the new quiet and envies it. He becomes generous by pretending he decided to be. The apposa cools toward midnight. You perform the liturgy everyone can steal without permission because it is undramatic, correct, and durable. Crates down, rope unknotted, bench set back, board left up. The herald rolls his scroll and asks to carry 1 bucket just to see. You let him. The gabelier, no longer counting figs, practices gratitude with both palms. The sisters laugh without gloating. The quarter-glass boy turns his sand like an organist who respects breath more than music. Because endings hire memory only if you recruit it bluntly, step toward the lens with me and make the call to action practical. Subscribe and tap the bell, the practical one, not the theatrical one, So part 7 lands before rhetoric slips its leash. In the comments, post the 7-word quarantine rule you would actually nail at mouth height. Witness heard, wash before rumor, door unbarred first. And tell me which doorway deserves rope next. Palazzo Records, Silk Quartergate, the Oposa by Lantern Light. We will bring rope, lids, bowls, maps, chalk, the quarter glass that never lies, and the plank that refuses flattery. And we will keep turning thunder back into hinges until even water knocks twice before it asks to pass. The silk gate pretends a painted beam can replace a promise, so you set the horn lamp on the lintel and rope the arch from jamb to jamb until a warm coin of light lands where basin, beam, rumor, and wages must agree, or Bologna will let spring rewrite Quarantina as theater and spend the winter's grammar like applause. The foreman strokes his ledger as if arithmetic were virtue. A gavelier arrives with the grin of a man who expects exceptions. 2 students, hats too new for honesty, bring a toast they want to call civic courage. Rope answers first. The quarter-glass boy flips his sand. The sisters of steam lift copper into position, and steam translates sentiment into verbs you can carry without rehearsal. Witness heard, charter read aloud, oath copied, billet listed, fever first, wash before rumor, wash before coin, door unbarred, window latched, straw aired, pallet raised, no crowd at bench, fees displayed, thanks before charges. The plank says, present where knuckles must brush truth before mouths attempt policy. The foreman points to the beam where 2 taps, greeting and oath, are painted at eye height for apprentices, and asks if courtesy still pays now that the air tastes like basil and optimism. Wash before coin answers by keeping his shop open longer than rumor can sprint. Wash before rumor answers by letting him brag without collateral damage. He knocks, he rinses, he carries, he pretends to have believed all this since last autumn and smiles at how easily pride learns to cooperate. Because this doorway is also the screen you're holding, pause with me and make the practical promise that keeps minutes public. Subscribe and tap the bell, the practical one, not the theoretical one, so the ledger closes with your wrists still remembering the grammar. In the comments, leave your 7-word quarantine rule you would actually hammer at mouth height. Witness heard, wash before rumor, door unbarred first, and tell me which street deserves rope next. The sisters will nail the best by the Oposa before terse. A herald from the palazzo arrives to redeem the city with a balcony. For the honor of Bologna, he reads, laughter shall be deferred to vespers, rinses to inspectors, mercy to forms. Charter read aloud returns him to the page that ranked basins above ribbons and gratitude above fines. Fees displayed prices every flourish in jugs, lids, and loaves. The balcony sighs into usefulness. The herald knocks the plank with the grace of a man who has learned to like being right quietly. The crowd, robbed of spectacle, finds itself delivered into errands. People who intended to clap leave with buckets, and the pleasant shock of discovering applause is poorer than survival. Rumor makes one last sprint under the bridges, quick and pretty in moonlight. Tonight, lantern alleys earn exemptions for morale. Wash before rumor sits at 3 culvert mouths and lowers its voice until the river remembers it likes schedules more than headlines. 2 culvert boys you drafted into adulthood clear grates, laugh like conspirators of decency, and earn their names twice under thanks, once for speed, once for finishing. The apposa, humiliated into loyalty, flows like a subordinate clause, learning to improve the sentence instead of escape it. Because apprentices measure rules by the way they feel on the hand, you carry grammar to the brickworks beyond Porta San Donato. Forearms nicked by winter's debt line up to knock the beam. Door unbarred receives thirst without paperwork. Window latched retires performance. No crowd at bench keeps lungs from being hired out to chorus. A boy with dust on his teeth and intelligence in his wrists reads the board aloud and asks whether buckets are politics now. Better, you answer, they are promises. He becomes a foreman faster than Latin could grant the rank. A house, chalked suspect contact, thinks destiny is whetstone. You introduce it to laundry. The landlord reproaches the traffic with a keyring. The landlord watches your basin as if it were a judge with a good memory. Door unbarred lets help arrive without purchasing shame. Window latched keeps the street from converting pity into currency. Pallet raised pardons the floor. Knife scalded, linen aired, swaddles rinsed persuade the hour to behave as if it were practiced. The infant arrives. The landlord fetches water, because witness heard makes it cheaper than speech. The chalk becomes soap. The house becomes a biography the city won't have to lie about in winter. The studio asks for a public disputation on quarantine and justice, hoping to footnote your basin into a precedent. You concede the chair and keep the schedule. Oath copied binds speakers to the quarter glass. Wash before rumor collapses 3 syllogisms into 1 courteous ladle. Fees displayed raises lids for widows between premises. A glossator who once thought cleverness was oxygen finds out being thanked under thanks feels better than winning. He knocks, he carries, he drafts a petition to staple witness heard to every accusation submitted while quarantina holds. You accept, with the small vanity permitted to people who prefer laws that remember what made them necessary. At the silk gate, a foreman who has learned arithmetic by survival asks if courtesy scales. Bianca answers by moving her common sense board inside the lintel, low enough that knuckles polish it. Apprentices teach overseers the 2 taps. Overseers pretend they invented them. The shop loses hours to neither rumor nor pose. Wash before coin becomes a joke no one argues with. Wash before rumor becomes a proverb that likes lids. You say nothing. Adults deserve the pleasure of believing they came to the right conclusion without prodding. The Oposa, whose vanity is eternal, tries again to sell exemptions to men who prefer applause to discipline. Rope occupies the measure between melody and water. A poet stands on a keg to declare that courage is a song. Fees displayed buys the chorus into bricks for a stove. Wash before rumor distributes the choir into pails. The poet discovers gratitude holds an audience longer than rhyme. He leaves with wet sleeves and the beginnings of a useful reputation. Because a city closes badly if it ends with speeches, you take grammar where it hurts to be unambiguous. The Palazzo records. The clerk who used to love fines now loves names under thanks. He shows you the margin he invented, witness heard before penalty, and you grow one size in relief. The gabellariere, who has chosen survival over cunning for 5 consecutive days, washes without being reminded. The notary signs spill paid in a hand younger than winter allowed. The podesta's sergeant knocks the plank for his men. Imitation keeps breathing. Lantern alleys, bored by their own virtue, test whether memory can hold them to it. A proprietor tries to levy pure hours. Bianca taps the beam once. The market chooses rinses over slogans. The proprietor quietly updates his tariff. The alley remains a language. A keeper paints the 2 taps on the inside of her door where shy people can rehearse alone. No one calls this kindness. Everyone calls it cheaper. Because no fabric is honest until it forgives a crease. The silk quarter throws you a crisis disguised as dignity, a wedding house with too many guests, a midwife with a knife hot enough to be respected, a priest brave enough to be brief. Rope saves the air. No crowd at bench outvotes reputation. Window latched shuts gossip out. Knife scalded, linen aired, swaddles rinsed, convince the hour to be fact, not morality. The child arrives. The ledger prints names in an order history cannot twist into poetry without blushing. The Sisters of Steam carry copper to the piazzola where country carts meet city nerves. They post a board low, paint the 2 taps on the stall post, and discover peasants admire rituals that keep them from buying extra candles. Fever first catches a muleteer before bravado can embarrass him. Wash before coin persuades a tax farmer he likes living. Witness heard makes a gossip convert herself by accident. The market becomes quieter without getting boring. You rate that the rarest civic luxury. Under the arches at San Giacomo, a Dominican proposes a final procession to bind the city in thanks. He has learned enough to bring jugs. You let him. Fees displayed times the hymn to deliveries. Thanks before charges reads names into the nave like wages. Wash before rumor keeps the Alleluia from hiring accusations. The bell rings on the quarter glass instead of applause. The friar smiles the humble smile of a man who has forgiven himself for once being counterproductive. Because endings hire memory only if you nail them where hands can reach. You perform the drill that never offends saints or budgets. Crates down, rope unknotted, bench set back, board left up. The herald, who has carried enough to deserve a story, rolls his scroll and asks to keep one lid as a souvenir. You give him two and the job of labeling them custom, where it will be useful to those who were not there. The culvert boys lean on their brushes like veterans. The quarter-glass boy never lies. The apisa minds its grammar. You step toward the lens one last time this hour, because the only ending that helps anyone breathe is the one that recruits you. If you want fewer lectures and more rinsing in your world, team chats, classrooms, family councils, city halls, subscribe and tap the bell, the practical one, not the theatrical one, so this craft has a life outside this page. In the comments, leave the 7 words you would nail where wrists will meet them tomorrow. Witness heard, wash before rumor, door unbarred first, and tell me which street, shop, or feed deserves rope next. The sisters will hammer the bravest beside the apposa by noon. Your elbows will do the rest. Why Quarantina changed Bologna's red light streets is plain now. Rope made permission public. Basins made laughter honest. Minutes paid for courage in a currency even strangers could afford. Lantern keepers stopped 3 kinds of extortion: moral, fiscal, and narrative, by selling rinsed time. Bath women promoted scald to scripture. Glossatori learned to knock. Foremen discovered courtesy scales. Clerics behaved when water supervised. Gabalieri remembered they liked breathing. Culvert boys became men. The river learned grammar. The palazzo learned to say thanks out loud without going broke. The city did not become pure, it became legible and therefore survivable. What remains tomorrow are habits. Bianca's board smudged by knuckles. Beams painted with the 2 taps. Basins nailed low enough for wrists. The quarter glass that never lies. The plank that bruises before speeches. The names under thanks that teach boys and girls which line pays a lifetime. The rope that refuses to clap because it prefers to work. And you, who brought your attention as if it were equipment and found out it is. You hang the horn lamp on the nail inside the silk gate for whomever keeps the next hour. The bell over the palazzo listens for its cue from a boy with sand instead of from the desire to be important. The apposa declines to smuggle exceptions under bridges it now admires. The city breathes the pleasant fatigue of neighbors proud of themselves for reasons that won't embarrass them in winter. We will be elsewhere soon, with rope, lids, bowls, maps, chalk, quarter-glass, plank, and 1,000 receipts, turning thunder back into hinges in whatever century you hand us. Name the street, Bring your 7 words. Tap the practical bell. We'll meet you at the door you want to teach.